Mark Rutledge, and this is Kyle Schoberg.
And today we're going to be talking about the Sonya Massey shooting. And we're not just going to be giving you guys our opinions. We're actually going to break it down by facts, the law, and what actually occurred that night. And we're going to dive into the deputy's background, which is pretty shocking, who fired the shots and was ultimately charged with murder. We brought in Scott Savage, the owner of Savage Training Group, in studio with us today. Scott, thanks for coming in and doing this. It's been a minute since you've been in studio with us, so thank you for making the trip.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Scott, you got to talk into the mic.
Thanks for having me.
This isn't your first podcast.
Scott, this is not your first rodeo. Get it together.
Come on.
There you go.
How's that better?
You're just being defiant.
Yeah. All right, so are we asking Scott the trick question that we ask everybody?
Yeah.
Okay. Scott, I know you've been here before, so you already may know the answer. Mark apparently have a follow-up question. If he does, we're going to ask you, with all the things that we got going on in this studio, how many outlets do we have?
One. I already watched the episode. See, you guys think I don't watch your episodes.
Cheater.
And I knew that was the question coming. I've already watched it.
All
it's
right.
one big, massive power overload. See, I support you guys.
So, well, hold on. No, two reasons why we ask. One, A, we want to see if you actually follow and listen. And two, if you actually knew the question. So you passed both.
Yeah,
nailed it.
Scott is incredibly intelligent. So the follow-up question, which you're not going to know because we knew you'd know this. How many of those power strips do we have? Don't look around. How many power strips do we have?
One.
Surge protectors.
Surge protectors.
One.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Two.
Wrong.
Come on, keep going.
7.
Oh, close. 6.
We're gonna get the fire. We are opening ourselves up for any firefighters that watch this for the fire marshal to come knocking on the door. But they have to find out where we're located first.
Yeah, no one will actually be able to do that because oftentimes we can't even find it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Massive liability. That's okay. I'm still going to do it.
Yeah.
We always want to preface too, we do shut everything down when we leave here, so we don't burn this place down. But yeah, we're left with one outlet and we have several surge protectors to power all this. So I actually think it's quite smart on our behalf with the ingenuity and everything. So
this podcast, it's safety second. Safety second.
Yeah. And who cares if it smells like smoke right now? Who cares? That's what I say.
It's just burning wires.
Don't worry about it. Yeah. We're cops. We can deal with it. Okay, so before we get into this video, Scott, tell everybody about who you are, a little bit about your background, and you are the owner of Savage Training Group. Obviously, we've got your stuff everywhere in here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, my name's Scott Savage, retired police officer in 2023, had 24 years of service, worked a variety of assignments, and I own Savage Training Group, which is a law enforcement training organization. We've got about 17 instructors right now. We're teaching classes all over the U.S., and our mission is to raise the bar of law enforcement training. I think it has a lot to do with some of the cases we're going to talk about, or this case today. We'll get into some of the training issues, but I really appreciate all your guys' support, and having you as instructors is a blessing for us. So thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. Make sure you guys go to savagetraininggroup.com and see all the list of the classes that Savage Training Group offers. Phenomenal classes. I mean, we have nothing but great things to say about you guys and your business. So,
and if they don't see a class that's posted, they can also get in contact with you to offer a class or to host a class.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Agencies can host classes. We've been to, I think, 20 or so states, but we're always looking to get to different states. If you want to have a really professionally researched, professionally executed training class at your agency, just go to savagetraininggroup.com. We'll head out to your agency and make it happen.
Nice. And I want to debunk something real quick, because sometimes when we go teach classes, we get asked if it costs money to host a class, and the answer is no. All you have to do is go on the website, request to host a class. It's free for the agency. Provide the room and the equipment, chairs for people to show up at, and you even give that agency free spots for their officers to attend.
That's exactly right.
Doesn't cost you a dime. You actually benefit from it.
That's it.
I wanted to get that out there because some people ask.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. We're going to get into this Sonya Massey shooting. It's is disturbing, and there's obviously a lot of other videos out there. And again, like we said in the beginning of this video, we don't want to just offer our opinion on the whole thing and just say, hey, blanket, this was a bad shooting. We want to actually break down the laws, the tactics that were used, and in kind of an in-depth discussion about who this deputy was that actually fired those shots, and everything kind of encompassing this entire disaster. This video obviously has gone viral. So let's break it down and talk about it. First, I want to talk about the deputy that was involved in the actual shooting. Scott, you did a bunch of research on this guy. Why don't you share with everybody his background and why it's important in the further discussion of what happened the night of the incident?
Yeah, the deputy involved in this looked like he had a pretty troubled history. And if you just look at sort of any major news source, they're talking about it. They filed immediately Freedom of Information Act requests on him, his personnel records, and they were able to get a ton of info. So they're saying he was discharged from the Army for serious misconduct, had a history of driving under the influence. I think I read something, maybe he had 2 convictions, for DUI. He had been disciplined from a previous agency for his decision-making, right? Under high stress incidents, something about he's in a pursuit. Supervisor tells him to terminate the pursuit and he doesn't, which is sort of what you got to do, right? You're a supervisor. I was a supervisor. And he continued on and was basically pursuing him with no lights and siren on, which is even more dangerous than just keeping your lights and sirens on and doing it. So he was, a couple personnel memos came out, and I think you can find them online, or certainly the synopsis of them, talking about where one of his supervisors was saying, this guy makes terrible decisions. How are you still employed with us, is what one supervisor remarked, which is pretty darn incredible. And they recommended he take all kinds of decision-making classes. Now, if you also publicly available now is his employment records, which showed that he worked at 5 previous agencies prior to the one he was at when the shooting occurred. It's not to say if you've worked at a variety of agencies, it's necessarily bad, right? We know people that have worked at a few agencies. I worked at one agency and then lateraled, reapplied, I guess you would say, to a new agency. Fine if you want to make a change. However, given the context of the rest of this guy's behavior, it just kind of paints a picture of maybe somebody who has got some issues going on. We don't know the man, don't know what the issues are, but spending less than a year at a bunch of different agencies and getting kind of moving around to all this stuff just maybe speaks to a level of commitment, or, gee, maybe I got in trouble here, I'm going to go move over there. It really looks bad for these agencies as far as their hiring practices. Every one of those agencies, which is mentioned by name, in the press now, locally is under a microscope. Why did we hire this guy? Or these other agencies are going, man, we dodged a bullet by firing this dude or getting him to resign. But the agency that did pick him up, where he was ultimately employed with when he was involved in the shooting, knew or should have known, about this guy's history. The last thing I would say just about him, just from some research and really it's just Googling this stuff, is there's a photo that's kind of going around that shows him. And if you kind of look a little deeper and find the whole booking photo where it's not cropped, you'll see his arms and he's got a bunch of tats on there. And before anyone in your audience freaks out, like, what's wrong with tats? There's nothing wrong with tats. But given the context, again, of what's going on, that is going to come up in court, right? When he's involved in a shooting and you can see the forearms and see the tats that are on there. I'm looking at his booking photo right now. Maybe you can, splice that in or whatever. Dude's got skulls on his arm. Mm-hmm. There's nothing inherently wrong with putting skulls on your arm. Maybe you like a death metal band that's got that, or you got some good reason for doing that. But I can tell you, as cool as you think that is, when this goes to court and your picture is, this giant photograph of you in front of the court, it's not going to be that cool, and they're going to use it to show frame of mind, right? Now, when you listen to this guy talk, I think he explains his frame of mind, and that's all you need to hear. But that's going to be used against him, as is all this other previous employment stuff. So that's kind of what I found looking at his background.
Yeah, I find it interesting. So being a supervisor, and I'm sure you've probably had the same experience, I think you have cops that are aggressive. They're great street cops. But they operate a lot in the gray area. And I know you've worked with some where, albeit they're out there maybe doing a good job, but they're pushing the envelope, operating in that gray area. And eventually, like case in point, his supervisor tells him to, cancel his pursuit. He's still chasing the person with no lights and sirens, right? Because he just doesn't have it in him to stand down from that, right? He's chasing the rabbit. He wants to get the bad guy. And so I think that's ego driven. So when you have cops like that, I think it's so imperative that supervisors have to hold cops like that accountable so it doesn't spiral into something like this. And it will eventually, may not be as drastic as this, but it will turn into something where that cop is going to do something to either get himself severely in trouble and or a partner, and to include the supervisor. So I think that's worth noting. If you're a supervisor, you work with people like this who they're skirting that gray area all the time, I think you really got to pay attention to that and not just brush it off as, that's just kind of the guy that he is, it's important. I mean, have you worked with people like that?
Yeah. And I want to mention the multiple agencies that he worked for. You even said it, it's not necessarily that you're working at that many agencies, you're switching around. There are plenty of people that relocate, different opportunities, but all of those were in such a short amount of time. I think it was since 2000. This is a 6 agency since the year 2020. I'm sorry, 2020.
Yeah, I was going to say 2000. No way.
Yeah, within 4 years, it's 6 agencies.
Yeah, you're right.
That's the part that's kind of triggering.
Red flags. And so, I guess the question becomes, well, why did this agency pick him up? And for anybody that's not a cop who's watching this, to become a police officer, even if you're a cop and you want to lateral to another agency, you still have to go through the exact same background process that anybody else would have to go to. So these agencies would have had to have put him through this background process where they would have known about all these misconducts and write-ups and DUIs and all those things before taking that problem on. The excuse of, well, they didn't know about it. Again, I'm only saying this to people who aren't familiar with that. They would have had to have known about his prior conduct.
Yeah, but part of the hiring process too, though, should point out is that they're known and they know about that information, but then that applicant, who is this deputy, is allowed to explain those situations. And those background investigators may believe that or think he's changed, he's done his punishment, and they think that portion of the problem is no longer there, and then they move on. Yeah. So it's not just like they knew about it, but they did it. There's an explanation process as well.
Yeah. And I think there's also a lack of standardization there, right? So one agency may have a very strict standards where they're like, we're not touching this guy because we don't know what other places he applied at. I bet if you really got into it, he's got applications in all over. Probably, and it's kind of like whoever said yes.
That's a good point.
Now this agency, I think I don't know if it's the last agency or one of the agencies in there said, well, yeah, we did know about some previous discipline, but had he explained it like he explained it to us at the time he was working for that agency, then it would have been okay. So kind of like to Mark's point, it's like, we don't know how it was adjudicated. What did he say during the employment process? What specifically did he leave for? And agencies often to avoid a wrongful termination lawsuit will say, we're going to fire you, Kyle. Would you like to quit instead?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that does the agency a favor because they avoid any part of wrongful termination because you can't come back and sue us because we didn't fire you, remember? But what it does is it kind of jams up everybody else because although maybe I'm going to use you, but the applicant was a bad cop, he resigned. He didn't get fired. He doesn't have any adverse employment stuff. So then he can go out and be a free agent and get hired again. But the city, the first agency that wanted to fire him, is like, sweet, we don't have to deal with this guy anymore. And the officers always say yes when the agencies make them that deal because why wouldn't you say yes? You're not going to be like, no, fire me.
Yeah, because you're ultimately going to get fired at the end of the investigation.
So that's how that happens. I mean, if people are wondering like, how can this be? Well, it's complicated, but you got to think about it from the actual employment law stuff. And this happens in private industry too. It's just, that's what, this is one of the reasons why people are able to bounce around like that.
Yeah. So, okay, let's talk about the tattoo thing real quick. Yeah. You brought it up. I guess I would ask both of you what your thoughts are on agencies allowing cops to show visible tattoos, or should they limit what those tattoos are? But then that's like a whole other issue.
I don't think they should be limiting showing your tattoos.
It's either all in or no.
Yeah, I'm okay with showing tattoos. I'm okay with like beards, different things like that, because the public wants law enforcement to represent their community. And my community has tattoos. My community has beards. Like that's where I come from with that. So I'm okay with it. But furthering with that, it's if you cover them, your booking photos could still have that. And then depending on the jail, if you have tattoos, they're going to take pictures of your tattoos because they want to identify if you're a gang member or not. And they're not going to treat law enforcement any different. This person's being treated no different than any other person that's been arrested. So they're going to identify your tattoos anyways. And I imagine they have access to that. So covered or not, I imagine that stuff's going to be coming out.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion either way as far as beards, tats, outer carriers, all the stuff that agencies are doing. Like to me, I think about, man, we got bigger fish to fry than worrying about that stuff. I personally just don't really have a strong feeling. My thing is just like when cops are doing stuff like getting tattoos, the t-shirts they wear, the stuff they're putting on Instagram, like this is a free country. You could do whatever you want. I just always wonder, do you realize like how this is going to play out when it goes to court? And just, you know, from being a trainer, I just find myself researching a lot of court cases all the time because we look at, oh, how did this end up, right? We see the body cam, but how did things play out in court? And time again, I'm seeing this stuff. There's a lot of interesting cases out there, like Daniel Shaver, the guy that was killed in Mesa, Arizona, where the shooting officer had modified the ejection port on his AR that said, "You're effed," right? That, I guess, seemed really cool when you did it, probably not as cool later. There's a kid named Dustin Pigeon who was shot out in Oklahoma City, and the sergeant that ended up shooting him, it was ruled a bad shooting, and he was criminally prosecuted. And that sergeant, to show his frame of mind, the prosecuting attorney introduced his T-shirt business that he had off, you know, on his off time, and you can already imagine what his T-shirt said, right? Yeah. I hunt the evil you pretend doesn't exist. Yeah. Big game hunter, and all this macho stuff. And it's like, dude, that may seem super cool and rad, and you think you're so tough when you're doing that stuff. It looks, you're giving the prosecution, you know, ammunition. Now, these people I mentioned, I'm not trying to defend them and give them a way out, like hide that stuff so you don't get prosecuted, because everyone I mentioned needed to be prosecuted. But for the good cops, for the regular dudes among us, it's like, just don't create problems where it doesn't need to be there. Or if you're going to do it, just look me in the eye and go, hey, I know how it's going to play out in court when I get into a shooting. I'm purposely screwing myself, and I'll be like, okay, dude, right on.
Yeah. Yeah. This is an interesting career. If you're in law enforcement, those are all things you have to take into consideration. This is a job where you do have the lawful authority to take a person's life, and that is not taken lightly. And, you know, all these things that you do outside of work, post on social media, everything that you guys just talked about, no other job has to worry about that, you know. So you got to take it into account.
Yeah.
So,
well, let's get into it.
Let's talk about the video. So the deputies are called by Sonya Massey to her house for some type of, she thinks there's an intruder, or a prowler at her house. We'll play the video footage for you guys. You can see that the deputies are on scene, clearing around her yard, and it's obviously late at night. And I want to make note that this type of call is, if you're a graveyard cop, this is a absolute routine nightly call for service that you're going to get. You may get people who hear animal noises or something on the side of their house, and they think somebody might be breaking in. The wind might cause an issue, doors slamming. You know, people don't want to go outside and check their own properties if they believe somebody's out there. So, right. So that's why they call us. So this isn't like some out of the ordinary call for service for a graveyard cop to go to. They show up. It appears that they obviously realize that there's no intruder. No one tried to break into her house. The screens weren't taken off her windows. Nothing like that. They end up inside her house. They try to identify her, and we're going to break down the laws and all the legal aspects for you guys here in a minute. But it starts to go a little sideways when she's digging around in her purse. She's trying to find her ID, and all of a sudden, I think she starts making some comments or statements where I'm pretty sure the deputies start to realize that maybe she's got some mental health issues, things going on. And one of the deputies sees that she's boiling a pot of water in the kitchen and makes the comment, let's shut the stove off. We don't want to start a fire while we're here. She gets up, goes to turn the stove off. She then grabs the pot of boiling water, makes the statement to the deputies that she's going to rebuke them. And that's when the one deputy goes from 0 to 100, pulls his gun out, makes some threatening statements to her that he's going to shoot her in the face. And as this whole commotion is going on, she ducks down. It looks like maybe to put the boiling pot of water down. We don't know. He kind of approaches her to maybe get eyes on her as she goes under the counter, and then shots are fired, and he ultimately shoots her. There's a lot obviously to break down in this, but let's start with why they're in the house. The legalityness of identifying her. Should they have recognized the mental health issues and immediately left, and we just like take it from there, because everything after that point is where everything started to go bad.
Yeah. And so I looked up their law, their deadly force law in Illinois, and it's really interesting. It's a copy and paste of California's new use of force law that came out in 2020. And I've noticed that when I train across the country, cops from other states are always like, oh, you guys in California, you got your hands full out there with all those restrictive laws. And so I would just say for folks in the audience, like if you're a cop in another state other than California, like be advised, this stuff can be coming to your state. It happened in Illinois. Happened in Washington, I think it was. So I'm reading from Illinois' Combined Statutes, Section 7.5, which is their use of force law. And maybe as we're talking about stuff, I'm just going to pull out pieces of this law and be like, hey, says it right here kind of thing. And starting right there, it literally says that agencies are encouraged to adopt policies designed to protect individuals with physical, mental health, developmental, or intellectual disabilities, or individuals who are significantly more likely to experience greater levels of physical force during interactions, as these disabilities may affect their ability of a person to understand or comply with commands from police officers. So just backing up, if you remember in the video when he's on the doorstep, she says something to the effect of like, oh, I'm kind of not doing okay, or I'm doing okay, or I'm getting the help I need. And he picks up on very clearly, like, are you sure you're okay? Do you need some help? You know, there's no way you can say he wasn't keyed up on the fact that this is probably somebody with a physical, mental health, developmental, intellectual, you know, one of those issues. The lawmakers have put it in the law in the state saying, when you see these things, you have to know, you knew or should have known, that's the term they'll use in court, you knew or should have known that this person could have difficulty complying or understanding commands. So fast forwarding, anything that happens after that, you're put on notice by, even if it wasn't in the law, just sort of common sense. Like, this isn't going to just be a normal conversation I'd have with someone who doesn't have some mental health struggles. And we'll get into, is it smart when you think someone's got boiling water over there to tell a mentally ill person, go grab that water? We'll get into that. But I think, to your point, he knew, right? And it's very obvious this person had some mental health struggles right from the get-go.
Okay, so legally, can the officers identify her being on call? Yes, they can. I mean, they can ask her for her ID. They most certainly can do that. And she's being compliant with them. She's trying to give them her ID. And then she starts to make more and more comments where I think, things start to kind of go from, okay, something's not right here. To your point, the officer does ask her, go turn the stove off or whatever, because we don't want to start a fire in here. And you're right. Like, before we even started recording, you were like, well, that's like telling somebody who's mentally ill, go grab those knives and go put them somewhere else, because we don't want those to be a factor in this call we're dealing with right now. That's just not a smart decision to do. He could have done it himself. But at what point do you think, I'll ask both of you, but what point do you guys think that, okay, things aren't going well, they know there's no intruder, there's no crime that has occurred at this point? Should they have just left?
My opinion is, yeah. And I keep keying in on, why would somebody, why do you want them to turn the water off? The boiling water, why do you want them to turn it off? You're getting you're IDing them and then you're leaving. Like, do you plan on being there longer? That just, there's no real discussion on it. It's just intriguing. Like, why would you have someone turn the water off if you're just getting their ID and you're leaving?
Yeah, great point. When you're outside of our house, the only way we can go inside someone's house is with consent, warrant, exigency, maybe a probation or parole clause. They ask for consent, they're allowed to go in. Absolutely. Can you then ask to the person for identification for my report, which is what he said. I need your information for my report. Yeah, you can ask her. She's under no legal obligation to provide that, but she seems to be getting it. Now she's digging around in her purse. She's saying, well, I'm going to show you some documents and all that kind of stuff. So right there, I mean, this is someone who's got some mental issues. How far are you going to take it to try to get that name? Not very far is probably the issue, right? But she's sort of compliant and she's saying that. I like what Mark just said though. It's like, why do we need the water off? What happens if boiling water continues to boil? It's not like a pot of, oil or something like that, or maybe they couldn't tell.
It just evaporates.
Yeah, it evaporates. So, maybe they couldn't tell. They're going to say, well, gee, it could have been anything on the stove. Okay. But the wisdom of telling someone who or should have known is mentally ill to go grab hot water, and then perceive that them grabbing hot water as a threat makes no sense. There's a lot of legal theories about that's called officer created jeopardy, state created danger. It, in a nutshell, says you can't create your own exigency. right? If a vehicle's coming at me and a guy's trying to run me over, the law allows me to shoot at this person or do anything else to use like deadly force against someone who's trying to kill me with a vehicle. But I can't go run out in the freeway here and stand in the middle of the freeway right now and then shoot the guy who's coming at me and then say, well, you guys said I could shoot people who were trying to drive me over. You know, you would say, well, wait a minute, Scott, that doesn't make any sense. You put yourself in that situation. And I sometimes think that, you know, as cops, we do things that we're not playing chess, we're playing checkers. We got to think a few steps ahead here. Like, this isn't smart, what I'm about to do.
Yeah.
And when the person does do that and is not, you know, arming themselves with a knife or a gun or something like that, but is holding onto some water, I think there's about 20 other ways to handle that, right? Other than with planting your feet in the ground and pointing a gun at her.
I do think it's interesting that, and we should take into account that it's 12:50 in the morning when they're getting this call. It was 30 minutes before about 30 minutes before the first shots were fired. But you're going into a home, you're recognizing that someone has boiling water on, kind of disheveled. That's all different. You know, it's like the general public is sleeping. Like they had to have keyed in on that. All of those things, like all of those things are things that any good police officer is going to recognize.
Yeah, true.
Okay, so it gets interesting when so now she goes and grabs the pot of boiling water, right? Could you argue that hot boiling water could cause great bodily injury if thrown on you? Maybe, maybe. I don't know how much water was in this pot. The officers did start to close the distance on her when she picks that up. Let's talk about the deputy who fired the shots, his initial reaction to when she says, because he's laughing and joking with her, like literally he's laughing with her as she's going to turn the water off. And it wasn't until she made the comment about, Jesus will rebuke you or I will rebuke you. And I mean, it flipped a switch in him and he went from 0 to 100. The things that he said to her, I'm going to, effing shoot you in the face. To me, I mean, that comes across like this guy is like just itching for that scenario where he gets to use deadly force. Maybe that's a stretch, but from what he's saying and the tone of his voice, it's almost like he wants to be in that scenario. And I wanted to talk about like when cops make statements like that, like I'm going to shoot you. Are those things appropriate to say to people that you feel like you might have to do that to somebody? Yes, I think that there are times when it is okay to tell somebody that, and it's all recorded on body cam. If you do this, I'm going to do this. I don't have a problem with that. Where I have a problem with this guy is him saying, I'm going to effing shoot you in the face. Then the shots are fired and then his buddy wants to get the medic bag and he's like, dude, I shot her in the effing face. She's done. Yeah. I don't know, let's talk about from the point that she grabs that boiling water and he goes from 0 to 100. And then he kind of closes that distance on her a little bit as she ducks under the counter. Is that legal reason to shoot somebody?
No, I think it's very clear because it's not really our opinion whether it's legal or not. It's the local prosecuting attorney who said, no, it wasn't illegal, or it wasn't a legal shoot, right? Even if we were, which we're not, saying that's a good shoot, that was legal. Like, it doesn't matter what we think. It's the attorney. And that's sometimes cops don't understand that. I don't determine as a police officer what is reasonable force. I don't write in my report, I used a reasonable amount of force. That's determined by the trier of fact, which is a judge or a jury. That's not for me to say, right? I try to demonstrate the fact that it was reasonable, but here the attorney, the district attorney, whatever they call it there, is saying this is not a legal shooting. If you go to the video, she says, I rebuke you in the name of Jesus. And I'm wondering, does this cop know what the word rebuke means?
I don't.
Here it is. I looked it up. To express sharp, stern disapproval of, reprove, or reprimand. So in other words, she was saying, I strongly disapprove of you in the name of Jesus. That's not a threat.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like I said, hey, I'm about to get this water. I'm going to kill you. Yeah. I'm going to throw it on you. So did he, because he didn't know the definition of that, interpret this as some threat? I don't know, but that doesn't give you a right to do it. And if you, again, go to their law, this Illinois combined statute law, it says, just like it does here in California, that an officer can use deadly force when they believe a person presents an imminent threat of death or they use the word great bodily harm to the police officer another person, and they define imminent as when, based on the totality of the circumstances, a reasonable officer in the same situation would believe the person has the present ability, opportunity, and apparent intent. So using what occurred with Miss Massey, the present ability would be the hot water.
The boiling water.
The opportunity would be the fact that, I guess, the officer is in a throwable distance of said water.
And she's holding it.
She's holding it.
She has to be able to have the ability to even throw it on him. So she's holding it.
That's right. And then the apparent intent, well, I don't know if this in the officer's mind, he thought the statement about being rebuked in the name of Jesus was some formulation of intent, but nothing up until that point has she demonstrated hostile intent. As a matter of fact, she's been nothing but cooperative. Mentally ill is not the same as hostile, right?
Yeah.
She's done nothing to be hostile. She's the one that called for help. She said, hey, I think there's a prowler outside. I'm looking for my ID, but I want to give you some documents that I want you to read. And you told me to go turn off a boiling water, and I'm doing just what you said, right? And so for the officer to then interpret this as a threat, it's not reasonable, right? He may subjectively in his mind go, yeah, but I thought this and I thought that, and I thought that's cool, but it's not objectively reasonable. What you think in your mind is not the, it's not what the court is using to evaluate that. And it's pretty clear when you just apply the law, because I think anybody can look at this. Most reasonable people look at this video and go, that's not great. That's not a good shooting. That cop needs to be prosecuted. That's true. But if you're a police officer, you're a trainer, and you're trying to help other young officers understand this incident, you got to know why. And you know, don't just be like, well, don't do that. Nah, you got to tell us why, because the law doesn't allow it. And the law is the rules, and those should inform our tactics after that. So this guy should have been in there going, hey, I don't think the law is going to support what I'm going to do. You know, and I think there's a million other ways we can talk about handling that incident, even if you are concerned about the fact that she's got that water, right?
Well, I think it goes to some of the mindset too, because he had worked for so many departments. And one of those departments, we had chatted before, he was only there for a matter of months because he refused to live within a certain driving distance of that department. We discussed, we didn't know if he knew that at the time of being hired, or if you have a certain amount of time to move within that time frame once you are hired. But he's still making his own decision of, no, I'm not going to do that. And then you get to this point and it's like, he did get triggered. There was an immediate trigger, and it was really aggressive out of nowhere. And I don't know if that's because his partner was behind him. Maybe he didn't know what was going on, but there was a trigger, and he definitely got elevated. In one of the other departments that he even worked for, that agency said that he needed high stress decision-making training. And I think this demonstrates the high stress decision-making training, because was this a high stress situation?
Yeah.
Did he Absolutely make it not. That? Yeah. He made it
interesting.
That, but yeah, it wasn't. I mean, and his like demeanor and the way that he was talking to her, you know, I guess in his mind, he thought it was a lethal scenario, obviously.
Yeah.
But the way that he was speaking to her and the tone of his voice just struck me as like
he's in control. I am in control. You will do everything I say. I am the boss. I have this badge and gun.
Yeah.
That's how I took it.
It's sickening, honestly. Now post shooting, I can't help but feel bad for the partner that's there, because, you know, this guy is stuck with this cop who's displaying this probably super type A personality, right? So who knows what he's thinking? But he's like wants to go get the medical bag to render medical aid, which it doesn't matter if you believe the person is deceased or not, you know, where you've shot him. Like, we've all been in officer involved shootings. Like, you need to do that, right? You need to render the care. You're not the medical personnel sitting there declaring this person dead. You need to make the effort if it's safe to do so. So this guy's like wanting to go get the med bag, and he's just like, nah, don't even waste your time, man. I shot her in the face. That whole conversation after the fact, I found to be pretty sickening. Almost like, yeah, don't even waste our time doing that because I shot her in the face. Like, he was proud of that. Like, he said he was going to do that to her, and then he actually did it to her, and then it almost came across like he was proud of it.
Yeah, like, I told you so.
Yeah, that's true. And in their law, it even talks about the authority to use physical force conferred on a peace officer is a serious responsibility that shall be exercised judiciously and with respect for human rights and dignity and for the sanctity of every human life. It's really hard to argue any way that he's demonstrating a sanctity for human life when he's behaving in the way he did. you've got this mentally ill woman, you just told to turn the thing off, and now she goes and touches it. Now you got your gun out. She kind of cowers in the corner. He gets closer to her, which makes no sense. And then afterwards he shoots her in the face, and, partner says, I'm gonna get my med bag. And it's like, nah, don't bother. And then eventually the shooting officer does go get his own med bag, and he comes back in. And at that time, it looks like a sergeant has arrived, and he says, is there anything that can be done, Sarge? And the sergeant says, no. And he goes, okay, well, I'm not even going to waste my medical stuff. And he puts down his medical bag. It's like, well, first of all, none of you are doctors, right? I highly doubt any of you have any advanced medical training. That's not your position to pronounce death. And many states, including California, and I don't know about Illinois, actually have a law where you are compelled to render or summon medical aid after you use force on someone. So I would probably go ahead and render medical aid to that person, afterwards. And if it looks like it's, maybe the person's not going to survive, well, let's let the higher medical authority determine that, and they can sort of be the judge of that. But we're going to apply our training and do everything we can before that. And I think what you're pointing out is that your behavior after a shooting is important, especially even if it's not this shooting. You're just in a regular shooting, and it's a perfectly justifiable shooting. Well, the things you say on body cam, officers really need to think about. You're making a high def movie with a soundtrack after that, and what you say is going to come into play. Yeah. I had an experience where I was like third on scene to an officer involved shooting. Guy literally tries to drive over one of our officers, and I'm third on scene. I get the bad guy out, and we're rendering medical aid to him. And then the cavalry arrives and all this stuff. And 5 years later, I get called into federal court because the officer's being sued. And I get called into court, and I'm telling his lawyer, the officer's lawyer, why do you want me to go to court? I didn't really do anything. I was like third on scene. And his lawyers go, no, we love you. We love you. What you said on tape is perfect. What you did for this man in rendering medical aid and the way you were speaking to him helps to combat what his side is saying, which is the cops are all evil. They just wanted to shoot this guy and they're violent. It falls apart the minute you watch the tape. And so me and my other partner I was a paramedic before, he was an EMT before. So we're doing our stuff on him. At one point I got the bad guy a pillow for his head. Big guy's laying on the pavement. I'm like, hey, get a pillow. Let's put a chest seal here. Hey, buddy, you're not going to die. All that kind of stuff. Whether I like this guy or not, whether this guy tried to kill one of my partners 2 seconds ago or not, isn't relevant to the fact that our new mission is to try to save this dude's life. Yeah, it's the right thing to do, and the law demands it.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And I just had this conversation the other day with somebody, some other sergeants. I'm like, you got to cover this stuff in briefing. Everything you say after the fact is you're giving your statement on body camera. You got to watch what you say. And when your supervisors show up on scene, it's tough, because what is the first thing you do when you use force as a cop?
You got to explain to your sergeant what you did.
You got to call your sergeant and explain why you did what you did, why you used force, right? Now you're in a shooting.
Right.
I mean, you're so amplified and adrenaline is so up. It's like you want to tell them why you use deadly force, right? Because that is the ultimate force to use on somebody, lethal force. All you want to do is explain why you did that to somebody, and you can't. And it makes it really, really hard. And cops out there have to understand that you can't just start vomiting out the mouth about why you did what you did. And that's a whole other conversation, right? Yeah. That we would get into. But in this guy's case in point, you can't even show after the fact that he used lethal force that he even cared for her, gave an ounce of crap about what he just had done to her. It was all just, I don't know, it was like sickening in the way that everything he was saying and did after the fact. You can't prove, like in your case where you were showing compassion and trying to care for this person, you can't even prove that with this guy. Yeah.
Well, he's proving that he doesn't have compassion.
That's right.
At all.
No, that's right. I think, it's interesting when you watch the incident in this case, we also look at what happened afterwards, which is what we're talking about now. And maybe even beforehand, it's the law looks at, and their law is just like California's law, looks at pre-shooting conduct, right? Because we're talking about post-shooting conduct. It's interesting if you read their law, and this is probably true in many states, It says the officer, based on the totality of circumstances, the officer believed the person was a threat. Well, in Illinois law and in California and some other states, they actually define what that means. And I bet most cops haven't read this, but totality of the circumstances means all facts known to the peace officer at the time or that which would be known to a reasonable officer in the same situation. Here's the key, including the conduct of the officer and subject leading up to the use of force. That conduct of the officer thing is something that I think a lot of cops don't think about. Yeah, at the time the shooting occurred, it was legal. How did you get there? That's what courts now are starting to look at, pre-force conduct. How did we get there? Did we create our own exigency? Was there time to back up? Like in this case, right? You see this lady, she's got the hot water. If you somehow think this is some imminent threat, is there some compelling reason not to back up, to give her distance, to get out of the effective range of what you say is the big scary weapon system, right? You think this hot water is this big scary thing. Well, if it is, the first thing I want to do is get out of the effective range. She ducks down and she's got some weapon on her. I want to probably go there, right? Unless there's some reason, it's a hostage rescue or we got to get up close to her and we can't give up real estate. There's no crime. We don't have anything that would dictate that tactic. The law doesn't support it. Common sense doesn't support it. And like basic good tactics don't seem to support it.
Yeah. And I wish the other officer would have recognized, okay, my partner has his gun out. This is a pot of boiling water. I'm going to transition to a less lethal option like a taser or something. And if they felt it necessary to even use force on her, a different option other than the firearm. But they both drew their firearms.
It did happen quick though. And it looked like maybe the second officer maybe came out of a room or whatever, however he appeared, but he pulled his gun quickly. And then the officer in front of him actually moved in front of him. And it almost looked like officer number 2's gun like almost hit the back of the officer. Like the officer actually touched him with his gun. Like he moved so quick and then the shots went off. Like I think he probably wasn't watching what happened, heard the conversation. Yeah. And then
so he's playing off of his partner.
Totally, which I think is for him, because no one's really probably going to talk about this officer. I think his response was appropriate until you recognize and evaluate and then de-escalate or switch out to a different tool that you have. But I didn't think he had any time to do that.
Yeah.
And it also goes in, it's interesting you brought up like before, you look at cases where a suspect's been arrested, they write search warrants for their phone and like records, who they were calling, where they were driving, all these things up to that point. I wouldn't be surprised if it's happening or has happened, that to happen to officers that are like, hey, what were you doing the last 3 days? What are your text messages? What's your social media and what messages were you sending within the car about this call? Like a lot of that stuff could be coming up.
Yeah,
sure.
That's building the mindset.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff those things have been happening, for officers that are involved in shootings. So there's a lot to take in. I mean, the whole thing with this is sad. I mean, as a cop, you guys are former cops. Like I hate to see that because it's such a smear on the profession when one guy, with a shitty background makes a really shitty decision. And it that's all anybody talks about on the news, right? Is what happened in this scenario. And then it just paints such a bad picture to the entire profession of law enforcement when 99.9% of cops don't behave like this guy. But what I think it does show is that departments need to start freaking honing in and paying attention to guys like this. And when you got supervisors that are bringing this to their attention, they need to do something about it because something is going to boil over and something is going to happen. And this is a prime example of that.
Yeah, that's true. I think there's some training issues there as well, right? I don't know about it at your agency, but are we training officers what to say when our partner overcommits to something and is in too deep, is in too far? Do we have a phrase? Do we have a code word? Do we have something we can train officers to do? Because I think most people would look at that and go, hey, partner, you should have grabbed your partner and got him out of there. Yeah, but are we training that? Because we train this like individual operator mindset where the cops, we ride around our own cars, we do our own thing.
Yeah,
and
I act independently.
I'm contact, you're covered. You kind of just, be quiet. And as that cover officer, you need to be somewhere between like mute and mutiny, right? Somewhere between not saying anything and totally taking over the call. And at my agency, we started training guys break contact, the word break contact. Why? Because young guys thought it was cool, breaking contact. Like they saw the SEALs do it on some video, break contact, right? I mean, it sounds stupid, but it's like you got to train. If these young cats like to be tactical and stuff, let's train that. Okay, break contact. So when you see your partner in an FU fest with somebody and this isn't going well, or like in this situation, there's no crime. We're pushing forward on something. This is going to be all bad. Now we're pointing guns at someone who hasn't committed a crime. That right there is a key, because if we shoot this person, the Graham factors, crime, threat, resistance, whether they're trying to make, trying to escape, it's all bad. There is no crime.
Yeah.
So break contact or something like that would probably be a takeaway for agencies. Like, come up with something. Let's drill this. Let's not just wait till the big day it happens and hope my partner's going to call me off. Like, let's drill it.
Yeah. I like it. I think for a guy like this, I almost look at it like if his partner tried to do that, I almost feel like that guy would overpower his partner and he's going to do it anyways.
Oh yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Some guys like this just are not going to be told what to do. I mean, I think we have demonstrated that with his past behavior. So I think for some it would work. I think for people with egos like him, I don't see that working.
Yeah, you're probably right.
And I'm not saying it's not a good idea. I think it's a great idea, especially for his partner who's like, well, I tried to do that, and whatever his decision is going to be after that that's on him. Yeah. But I think as the partner, you can at least recognize that and you're trying to make a difference. But I think a guy like that he's doing his own thing anyways. And I don't think anything you say to him is going to break his attention from whatever his mind is set on,
Yeah. Well, I think this is a tragic case.
Yeah, it is. It's horrible.
Sonya Massey's family. Like,
absolutely.
I think we could all agree on that. I just want to highlight a couple quick little important dates, things that have come out on this. Like, this incident happened July 6th at 12:50 in the morning. Later that morning, a press release was done where the officer was fired and then ultimately arrested for that incident. Mm-hmm. July 12th, the civil rights attorney, Ben Crump, was retained. July 18th, that was the officer's first day in court where he pled not guilty. And then the following day, July 19th, is when Massey was laid to rest. So I just want to highlight a couple of those dates on that. A lot of things have happened pretty quick, but
it's very tragic, and hopefully nobody that's watching this thinks like we're trying to in any way argue that what this guy did is right. No,
absolutely not.
What I try to do is like, I think we can all look at this and go, this is not great, but I want to understand why. Why do these things happen? Which I think we're trying to delve into its history based on what we can tell from what's on the news. Why is this not right? Well, what do the laws say? What does good tactics say? What are the training issues? Because just looking at this video and going, that's terrible. Well, that doesn't help the rest of the 18,000 police agencies across the United States. So I like what you guys do, which is like, let's take this apart. Accuse us of being Monday morning quarterbacks if you want, but we're trying to learn something here. Like, we're trying to apply the lesson. What are the lessons? And then apply it so other folks can understand it and recognize it when this is happening to them. Because like you said, this is a nothing call that happens every night on all night shifts across America. And we get lulled into a sense of complacency with these nonsense calls. But as you saw, it's the little calls that we get jammed up on. This turned into a big call very, very quickly. Yeah. So I like what you guys are doing here. Just trying to what are the learning lessons? How do I make myself better? How do I keep other people from doing the same thing again?
There's a ton to learn from this video. If you really truly dissected it. And so hopefully we gave a little bit of clarity for that, which was the whole goal behind it, not just to jump on here and say, yeah, it was a crappy shoot. We know that, but like Scott said, we do want to share the why. So we're going to wrap it up with that, unless you guys have something else to add. Appreciate you guys watching. Make sure you go to savagetraininggroup.com, get signed up for a class near you. If you want to host a class, click the link, host a class. Scott will send his awesome group of instructors out to you. And that's all we've got. So we'll see you guys.